Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. I'm so excited you're here for this live chat. I'm bummed I had to miss the last couple of weeks. I had a Zoom class I was teaching, and then last week the family and I loaded up and went to Branson, Missouri to go on a family vacation. It was so much fun. But I'm glad to be back, enjoying this beautiful fall weather, and excited to be back for another live chat. If you're watching this live, don't forget you can leave your questions in the comments, and Jessica is here on hand. She'll write them down and I can answer them for you at the end. And if you're not watching this live, no worries. You can leave your questions in the comments and I'll be glad to answer them then. So when I was thinking about what I would talk about today in this live chat, I always try to keep it somewhat on topic, something about machine quilting, and I thought I would show you some of the designs from my new Smiley ruler. Can you guess why he got this name? I designed Smiley because I really was kind of being selfish about it. It was something for me. I wanted an arc ruler that I wouldn't have to go around a point, something that would give me nice, crisp points without having to kind of go around it. And so this is what came up. What I love about Smiley is you can get 2 different size arcs with it, but the designs I'm going to show you, you can actually do with any arc ruler. So even if you don't have Smiley, no worries, you can use your arc rulers that you already have. But if you do have the Smiley ruler already, I have put together a downloadable PDF with step-by-step diagrams that will show you how to do several different designs with this ruler. And you can get the link to that in the description box. And you can see how to do that. But what I'm going to show you today are 2 different designs. I'm going to show you one that isn't necessarily, it's not in the handout, but it's not difficult, so you can watch how to do that. And then I'll show you how to do cables. So first of all, let's check out this cute little border. This is what we're going to do here. We're going to do overlapping arcs. And what I love about this kind of design right here, this little guy right there, is if you have your skinnier sashings or your skinnier borders, it's going to be perfect for that. So this is not going to be for a bigger area. It's going to just kind of fit that nice narrow sashing that you might have on your quilts. But if you're working on a bigger area or you just need a little bit more quilting, you just want a little bit more to it, I'll show you how you can use the arc to create this cable. Now, what's great about cables is they look beautiful. They're such a classic looking design, but they are not fun to quilt without a ruler. I've tried, it's just not easy to get that perfect undulation of those arcs. In fact, at a retreat we had here at the building last week, somebody showed me a picture of some cables that she had done with freehand, and I'm like, that's amazing, because I wouldn't try that. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate how to use the Smiley ruler to create those shapes. So I have my machine ready. I'm going to show you on the sewing machine. Fingers crossed, everything goes great. Technology works for us. And don't forget to leave your questions if you have any so that we can address those at the end. All right, so the first thing I want to show you, it might be kind of faint, but I have my registration line marked. This is super important because I want to make sure my line or my little arcs are kind of in a straight line. Now, on an actual quilt, I might have a seam I can use, or I can mark that line, but since I'm just kind of quilting in this fabric, we're going to just mark that for me. And I'm going to quilt my arcs so that they fall on that line. Now, one of the things I love about Smiley, it has reference lines, and it has this one reference line right here, and that's what I'm going to line up with my registration line. So positioning it, again, having those needle stops not only gives me that nice crisp point, but it also lets me quickly and easily reposition it. Now, when you're working with rulers on your sewing machine, whether it's straight rulers, arced rulers, whatever it is, you're going to make sure that you quilt within your fingertips. And so I'm going to make sure that my hand is widespread and has good control of the ruler. Now, when I start quilting, I'm going to go from just along that smaller side, because I'm going to do the smaller one, until I get to the next needle stop. And there I have that first pretty little arc. Now, if I just wanted to create a petal shape, just one by itself, I would go ahead and flip the ruler over, line up my reference lines, and then quilt along the other side, just to kind of give me that nice symmetrical shape. But what's going to happen if I do that, it's going to bring me back to where I start. And if I want to quilt these in a row, I don't necessarily want to come back where I want to start. So I'm going to work my way along, doing one side of my arcs first, and then come back and do the other. Now, real quick, what's great about this is I can work just one side, or I can alternate sides. And I prefer to alternate sides so that those lines cross when I'm finished. This is just me, how I like to do it. So I'm going to work along this side and create my next little arc. But I could do this other side if I wanted to. Either one's fine. So now what I'm starting to get is this kind of S shape, and I can just keep going on and on and on until I get to the end of my area or until I decide that's as far as I want to go. And I'm going to do another couple so we can see what that looks like. Now, if you've never tried machine quilting with a ruler, no worries. I have a whole video series called the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along that will show you all different kinds of rulers and how to quilt with them. So check that out on my YouTube page. All right, once I decide, okay, that's enough, I've quilted enough, I'm going to work my way back and I'm going to quilt arcs in the alternate direction. So basically, just if this one goes out here, the next one's going to go the opposite way. And don't forget to use your reference lines to make sure that's lined up, and then work your way back to the beginning. Now, the ruler's only job is to help give you consistent-ish curves. It's not for perfection. So if your ruler wobbles a little bit, or if it's not perfectly where it needs to be, don't worry. Just keep going, because we're going to add a whole nother row of arcs on top of it that will help hide any unintentional customizations. Now, I will say on a sewing machine, it's no problem to whip this ruler back and forth around my foot. On a long arm, not so much. So I'm going to take my time kind of finding that hand position that feels the best. Now, when I'm done, I have that pretty little, let me pull it back so you can see it. I have that nice kind of scallop, those arcs that are all nice in a row, and I could stop there. Maybe I don't want such dense quilting, and maybe I'd like just how that looks, nice and simple arcs. But if you wanted to add another bit of interest, a little bit more quilting, I'm going to quilt another row, just like I did here, except I'm going to offset the first one so that they overlap in different places. Because if I just start at the starting point and I put the ruler in the same place, I'm just going to be going over the same design I've already went over. So instead of starting at the needle stop, I'm going to start at a halfway point. So I'm going to kind of position my ruler, again with my reference line right there on the drawing there. Hold on, I'm going to get bigger so you can see. I'm going to put my reference line right there. And here, if this is a starting point of my border or my sashing, I'm going to start about halfway along the ruler. What that's going to do is that's going to make those points that join end somewhere towards the middle of my previously quilted ones. That's what's going to give it that overlapped look. Now, once you get the first one done, it's no problem. The rest will kind of go the same way. My bobbin thread doesn't want to come up. Come up, come up. So it's just the first one you have to kind of think through. But I'm still going to use my reference line on my seam. I'm still going to quilt along. I'm just not going to start all the way at the bottom. So let's see where that leads us. And now that I have that first little one offset, I can go right back to what I was doing before, alternating directions, quilting my arcs until I get to the end. And so now you can see that overlapping starting to happen. Now, even if it's not perfectly placed, maybe this isn't perfectly in the center, I promise it's going to be fine. You're just going to have that beautiful overlapping curve that's just going to look beautiful. Now, just like I said, if you wanted to do just one side, I could just reposition my ruler, keep it on one side, and then come back and do the other side. Now, if this was the edge of my area, I could just travel along to the other side, but I'm going to go ahead and just finish this arc up. And then just like I did before, I'm going to work my way back to where I started. Now, the trickiest thing about this design or working with any kind of overlapping design is not letting the previous quilting distract you. I know it's very easy to kind of get distracted by what's already been quilted, but I'm trying to ignore that first section. I'm just trying to pretend it doesn't exist. It's like all the things in my life I don't want to do. I'm just going to not acknowledge them and just focus on what I'm quilting right then. And then working my way back. I see Jessica over there writing feverishly. You must have some good questions. There's some good ones. Now, hopefully you're watching this thinking, wow, she makes that look easy. Well, that's good. I'm supposed to make it look easy. If I got on here and made it look difficult, you wouldn't want to do it. So just know that once you get the hang of it down, it goes really fast. So try not to let it intimidate you. And remember, that last one is just going to be a halvesy. And then when you're done, you have that pretty overlap design. On the Tula Blooms quilt, that's a kit on our website, I did this in the stem of the flowers, and I thought it looked so adorable. Just nice and simple, but easy to get that repetitive wave and that kind of perfect-ish looking design. Now, if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, I want to try that again repetitively over the quilt, this particular ruler doesn't have that halfway mark line. You can get a piece of washi tape or something just to use as a reference so that you can easily reposition it on each row. Makes it nice and simple. All right. This is perfect for those little areas, but if you want a little bit more pizzazz, you want a little bit more density, you can do the cable design. Now, what's great about the cable design is I'm doing the same exact thing we just saw. That very first row, we're quilting them so they overlap, or quilting a row of them out and back. So we've already kind of seen this, but we'll do it again, and I'm going to use the bigger side to show you what that looks like. These cables are basically just sections that overlap ever so slightly. So if you kind of get that in your mind, that kind of makes it a little bit easier. Now, working along the longer, so I got to check where I'm at. One of the downfalls of quilting on a sewing machine is you can't always see behind you. So I got to do the little duck and check real quick. Quilting along the longer curve is not more difficult. I'm just going to take my time paying attention to that point of contact on the foot and just trusting my hands to bring me there. I'm going to stop once I hit that registration line. So same shape, just a little bit bigger, no problem. Then I'm going to rotate the ruler and then move on. Now, the way that the ruler worked, I didn't put another middle reference line up here because I feel like if you get too many reference lines, it can be pretty tricky. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my little needle stop and I'm putting my reference line right in there. So as I look back, it's hard to see up there, but I'm just looking and making sure that it lines up over that reference line. You can also use the little end, this little needle stop. If you line that up with the reference line, that will also give you that registration. But we know it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going to get it close. And I'm going to keep going depending on how long I want that cable to be. In this instance, I'm going to go ahead and stop now because it does take a little bit of time for this design to develop. So I'm going to go out there, and now it's time to work my way back. Now, as I'm working, again, I'm kind of looking at my marked line. I'm lining up the edge of my little needle stop on there, and I'm going to just quilt. Now, if you are quilting on a sewing machine, you're going to quickly find out that one direction feels easier than the other. So if I wanted to, I could quilt my way all the way back out, then I could rotate the quilt and do it again. I might find that easier than working my way back and forth. But since I feel comfortable working in both directions, it's not a big deal. The trick is just to find what makes it easier for you. All right, once I have my first section, which, I mean, we've already seen this with the little ruler, no big deal, just a couple of those overlapping arcs. We're going to quilt the same thing, same section, except I'm going to space it over a bit. So instead of offsetting, like I did the previous one, I'm actually going to move over and quilt another one so that it overlaps. Now, how close you quilt these rows will determine how dense your cable is. And I think it tends to look better if they're fairly close. So about a ½ inch, in my opinion. Of course, I'm only the expert of my opinion, but about a ½ inch is what works for me. So I'm going to scoot my way on over. Of course, I probably wouldn't just quilt that. I would just break thread. And I'm going to do the same design I've just done, right? So if I wanted to, I could mark another registration line and then work my way along. And again, I have to just ignore that previous quilting, pretend it didn't happen. And I can even line up that curve. There's a curve registration line right here. Line that curve on that previous quilting, and that's going to help give me that nice echo. get it repositioned since I moved it. Once I had that ruler in position, I do try not to move it because it's hard to kind of figure out where to go next. All right, so then you can see those first 2 arcs. Again, I'm just kind of ignoring that. It's like it didn't happen. And then I'm going to flip over and then repeat. Check it all out, see how it's going. Now, I prefer to quilt vertically because that's what's more comfortable for me. The downside to that is it's always hard to, it can be hard to see where you're going. If you find that just throws you for a loop, you don't love that, you can just quilt it horizontally. Horizontally is nice because you can see the whole path, but I kind of run out of room. So it's kind of a, catch-22 there. And the next one. Now this is going to be something for an area that I want to spend a little bit of time on it because it's going to take a little bit longer than just whipping out a feather, but definitely for a place where I want a little bit more elegant, a little bit more custom kind of look. Now you can kind of start to see that overlapping happening right here. Now what I'm not worried about is that it's perfect. I know when you have each row it can be a little bit disconcerting because you're like, oh, I want it to be right. But I promise, once it's done and you stand back, you're just going to see that beautiful overlap, even if it's not perfectly spaced. Let's just do one more, just for funsies. This is where having that marked line would be nice. Now, as I'm working through it, I'm using the same side of the ruler for the whole thing, but you can change up the look of this design by going big, little, big, little. Just remember when you work your way back, you want to do it the same way. So you want bigs together and littles together. So if you have room to think about one more thing, that might be a good option. A little bit of shredding thread right there. I'm not going to mess with it so we can keep going. But normally I would go ahead and rip that out, ugh, so sad, and then overlap my next line of quilting by a little bit and then continue on. Usually that happens if you're not moving smoothly enough or you're not moving the quilt in a consistent manner. Or if you're like filming and you're like, please, please don't let the thread shred while I'm going. That's usually a pretty good indication that it might. And then the last one, again, changing directions. And you can keep on going, keep on adding those cables as long as you want, depending on how much you love the person you're quilting it for. But I usually think, 3 is probably a good round number. But there you can see, minus that little thread breakage, that cable look. And where those overlap, where they come together, give that cute little diamond detail. So again, it's going to take a little bit longer than just your regular free motion design, but it is a quick and easy way to get an elegant look with minimal marking. And that's always a win-win in my book. I want to look like I spent a long time on it, but maybe not as much. Maybe I didn't spend quite as much. So if you're interested in learning more about the Smiley ruler, I keep wanting to call her Shelly. It's like when you have kids and you keep calling your kid by the wrong name. Totally the same thing. I was getting a ruler out of the stocking area, and I'm like, oh, here you are, Archie. Oh crap, it's not Archie, it's Smiley. So I'm gonna give my rulers, issues like my kids calling them the wrong names. But if you want some more information about the Smiley ruler, or if you want to check out that downloadable PDF, which you can use with any arc-shaped ruler, be sure to click the link in the description box below. It will take you to that, and it's absolutely free. So you can definitely check that out. But I think what's important about any ruler that you have is that you try to use it in different ways. When I think of arc rulers, I kind of think of echoes, I think of maybe petal shapes. But when you take your ruler and you experiment with it and you try to mix it up in different ways, you'll be surprised about the designs that you can create. And I know I've said this before in my live chats, but I love to put a yard of fabric on the machine or make a quilt sandwich and just see how many different ways I can use that same ruler. Then when I'm done, I cut out the pieces of the designs that I like, the rest goes in the trash, and then I have like a little, assortment of design ideas to work with. So hopefully that made perfect sense. You can see a little demo. Working on a long arm is not going to be much different. The main difference about quilting this design on a long arm is I'm definitely going to do this horizontally. This is not going to be something I'm going to try vertically. And so let's see the questions that came through. I'm not sure if this question is on there, but real quick, how do you connect multiple cables? Well, the answer is very carefully. It can be done, but I prefer to quilt these in little sections, kind of standalone motifs, so that I don't have to worry about connecting them. But basically what I would do is just start my next part of my design at the end point over here and build off of it. So it can be done for sure. All right, so this is one of my favorite parts about the live chat is answering your questions live. It makes me feel like, we're connecting. But again, if you're not watching this live, you can just leave those in the comments. I get on there from time to time to answer them, and other quilters are really great to help out as well. All right, any tips on eliminating baubles when starting and stopping and repositioning? That's the million-dollar question, right? Especially with an arc. When I have that curve and I'm stopping mid-curve, the trick is just to kind of learn how to ease in and out of it. Now, I hate that that's the answer. Basically just takes practice. It's like driving a manual car, getting used to that play of starting and stopping. The good news is it does come with practice. Try not to beat yourself up too bad about that, and just try to get it as close as you can. Another thing I will do is if I'm working on several rows of them, I don't try to reposition always in the same place. I don't want my little baubles always being in the same area because then they're a little bit more noticeable. So try to pause maybe on a busier fabric or on a seam where you can help hide those. Am I quilting backwards so we can see it easier, or was it forward? I was going back and forward, and as much as I love you, I was doing this for me. This is how I always quilt. So I like to quilt vertically. It's just easier because I can use my whole hand, my whole body to kind of push and pull. But again, like I said, you can play with that, find which direction works best for you. If you're on a sewing machine, you have that ability to change it up. So try a couple different ways. The one that makes you feel less like throwing up is the option to go for. So hopefully that helps you out. Am I using a ruler for a full-size quilt or just in smaller areas? The answer is yes. Everywhere, right? So you could do an all over cables all over the whole quilt, or you can just do it within a section. That's what I love about machine quilting rulers. They're really able to tailor to your skill level and the quilt you're working on. So yeah, you can use them for either one. Now I tend to quilt fairly densely, so my designs are all fairly chunked together. So I tend to work in little sections, but it can go either way. Do I use a foot control? Yes. So actually down underneath my table on two little boxes, they're my foot pedal boxes. I have the foot pedal and I have the speed set on my machine. So I'm kind of pushing down on the pedal, and if you listen, you can kind of hear sometimes we're revved up a little bit. So this doesn't have a stitch regulator, so my stitches are organic length or different lengths. So yeah, definitely using a foot control for that. How does a Smiley differ from Elvira from making curves? Elvira's curves are smaller. I never thought I'd say that, right? Smiley's got some bigger curves. Now, Elvira's curves really fit within like a 2-inch repeat, so a lot smaller. Think about using it for continuous curve in 2-inch squares. And you can use it as a wavy all over ruler. I think I have Elvira right here. Look, I just happen to have her right there. So that's the Elvira ruler. So just a lot smaller curves. If you were to take that curve out and pull it out, then the Smiley's a little bit bigger. So I think the Smiley has 3-inch and 4-inch curves, if I remember correctly. So just a little bit bigger. I designed Elvira for wavy lines, but it's not a repeating wave, so that it creates a different kind of texture, and it's great for continuous curves. So I do have videos and a PDF on how to use that. But same kind of shape, just in a different application. Can you use a low shank ruler on a high shank machine? Yes, you can, very carefully. The trickiest part about low shank rulers is this is actually a low shank ruler right here. I just don't want it to slide underneath the foot. And if you have a foot that's too high, that can happen. Here, let me zoom in real quick on my foot. So this is a low shank one. That's fine. I just want to make sure that there's no clearance to go underneath it. Now, if you have a dynamic foot or a foot that kind of hops, check that out too, because I don't want it to hop up over the ruler either. Now, just know that this applies I'm only giving this advice to people with sewing machines. A long arm has a hopping foot motion, and that foot will hop over and it will jump on top of your ruler, and your needle will hit your ruler, and it will break your needle, it'll break your ruler, and you'll pee your pants. It's just not good fun. Never a good time. All right, how do you keep the ruler from sliding? I've got some sticky fingers. Oh, no. Practice, first of all. I don't even know where my Smiley went. I'm going to quilt within my fingertips. And if you watch the video series, the Free Motion Challenge Machine Quilting Ruler Series, I always talk about how it's important to quilt where your fingertips are. Now, I design all my rulers so that they're about hand size. I do that because, you know, I love you and I don't want you to break your ruler. But if I'm working with a bigger arc, I'm going to move my hands as I'm working along that curve because you're going to have your most control where your fingers are. What happens a lot is I'll start quilting and my fingers will be over here and my foot will be over here, and then that's where you lose control and you get those bobbles, and sometimes that's where the ruler will fly up and maybe get in the way of your needle. Again, not a fun time. These rulers have Creative's Grids grip on the back. It has a nice grip, but not too much. If you need a little bit more grip, you're like, I want this thing to stay in place. I don't want to move. You can add on some grip on the back, like Handy Grip. Handy Quilter makes some grip. There's True Grips, any kind of grippy thing to put on the back, and that will help you kind of keep it in place. Another thing, this is not really the question you asked, but it's kind of related. Just make sure your quilt, if you're working on a big quilt, is all up. Because what can happen is as that needle comes up, your quilt can kind of move on you, and it's hard to control that and the ruler at the same time. So kind of keep it up. Could Smiley make a braid without backtracking? I don't know. I haven't tried. I would love for you to figure that out and let me know. Now, I'm not sure. The overlapping bit, they need to be kind of separate. I'm sure that, I don't know if you can or not. I'll have to think on that. That's going to wake me up in the middle of the night, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, you can. I can do it. Should I do a reverse stitch once I refill my bobbin thread? I'm assuming this is at a start of a line of quilting. I'm not sure if that's the question. What I like to do is I pull the bobbin thread up, which you saw me kind of trying to get it with my gloves, and then I take a few stitches in place. So I don't reverse stitch. I just use my needle up and down button to kind of take a few stitches in place to help knot it, help secure it, and then just start quilting. So that's how I did that. Where did you get those quilting gloves? Those sexy quilting gloves, those are my favorites. I sell them on the website. They're called Reggie's Grip, and I like them because they do have a little bit of grip. They're not too heavy, don't make my hands too sweaty, and let's just be honest, they look pretty on camera, so lots of fun. You can find that on quiltingismytherapy.com. When quilting vertically, do I start in the middle of the quilt? Good question. I don't know who asked this one, but they get a star. So it's one thing to know the design, right? It's a totally different thing to know how to apply it to the quilt. And so on a long arm, of course, you're gonna be working top down. So I'm gonna be starting where I'm at. Now on a sewing machine, you can start anywhere you want. Starting in the center is nice because it's never gonna be heavier than it is at that moment. So that's great. I can kind of get the hardest part out of the way before I lose interest in this quilt. But you can start anywhere you want. So if it makes sense to you to start at the edge and work your way along that whole quilt, no problem, you can definitely do that. But if you want to start in the center, quilt your section and then turn it and then connect them, you can definitely do that. I think maybe in the beginning, if you're newer to rulers, maybe try it within a defined space, like a bigger section on your quilt, maybe not as an all over, because that can be kind of hard to reposition, but it can definitely be done either way. And so I probably would start at one end and work my way across, but it totally depends on how you want to do it. So there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to that. Great questions. I hope that has encouraged you to get out those machine quilting rulers that you may or may not have laying around. You know, the ones that you bought because you went to a show and somebody was demoing them and you're like, that looks cool. And you get home and you're like, I don't know how to use this. Oh, maybe that just happens to me. I have plenty of templates around that are like that. I'm like, so be sure to check out the downloadable PDF so that you can see how to create the designs and actually know and love and use your Smiley ruler to its full capability. Well, I will be back next Thursday at 3 p.m. Central with another live chat. And even though I missed a few weeks, the rest of the month looks clear. So I look forward to being here weekly, chatting about quilting things and answering your questions live. So until then, everybody, please be safe and have a great week. Happy quilting.